A millionaire's son was so violent that 17 nannies quit in 6 months. Everyone said the child was beyond help, dangerous, impossible to reach. Then a quiet maid walked into his room, and everything changed in ways no one saw coming. The mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds where silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Wealth unable to mask the tension that permeated every room like smoke that wouldn't clear. Crystal chandeliers cast cold light across marble floors, polished to mirror shine. Expensive artwork hung on walls that had witnessed 17 different caregivers, fleeing in tears or anger. And somewhere in the East Wing, a child screamed with rage that made staff members flinch and quicken their steps in the opposite direction. This was the Montgomery estate, where money bought everything except the one thing desperately needed: someone who could reach a traumatized 6-year-old boy whose pain manifested as violence, whose grief had transformed him into someone even his own father couldn't bear to face. And walking through the service entrance with a worn duffel bag and eyes that had seen their own share of suffering was Maya Torres, about to become the 18th person to try and fail, or so everyone assumed. Before this story takes you deeper into what happened in that house, pause for just a moment. If you believe in the power of patience over punishment, in understanding trauma rather than condemning it, and in the way broken people can sometimes heal each other when the world has given up on both of them, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to remember that love can reach places force never will. And subscribe to Untold Kindness Journey. Your support helps us tell stories that prove the most damaged hearts sometimes just need someone willing to sit with their pain. Christopher Montgomery was 6 years old and already labeled as disturbed, violent and beyond help by a parade of professionals his father had hired and fired. The boy's mother had died 2 years earlier in a car accident, and Christopher had been in the vehicle, trapped beside her body for 40 minutes before rescue arrived. The trauma had shattered something inside him, transforming a sweet child into one who bit, scratched, threw things, and screamed at anyone who tried to come close. His father, Richard Montgomery, a self-made millionaire who'd built a tech empire through ruthless efficiency, had no idea how to handle a grieving child and responded the only way he knew how, by throwing money at the problem and growing increasingly distant when money failed to fix it. 17 nannies had come and gone, each lasting anywhere from 2 days to 3 weeks before quitting. The most recent had left that morning after Christopher bit her arm hard enough to draw blood, leaving teeth marks that would bruise purple by evening. The woman had screamed at the child, called him a monster, and stormed out while Richard sat in his office pretending not to hear. Pretending the chaos in his home was just another business problem he could solve with the right hire, the right strategy, the right amount of money thrown in the right direction. He'd already called the agency demanding another nanny, someone tougher this time, someone who wouldn't tolerate his son's behavior, as if what the traumatized child needed was more strictness and less compassion. But Maya Torres hadn't been hired as a nanny. She was the new housekeeper, brought in to clean the mansion while Richard frantically searched for yet another caregiver willing to handle his violent son. Maya was 28 years old, a single mother herself whose own daughter had died from leukemia 3 years earlier. Taking with her every dream and hope Maya had built her life around. She understood grief intimately, knew how it could transform you into someone unrecognizable, how pain could make you lash out at people trying to help, because helping meant acknowledging the loss, and acknowledgement made it real in ways that were unbearable. On her first day, Maya was given explicit instructions by the head of household staff: clean everywhere, except the East Wing where Christopher's room was located, never go near the child, stay out of sight when he was in common areas, and above all, don't try to interact with him because it only made things worse. Maya nodded and accepted the rules, spending her morning cleaning the vast spaces of a house that felt more like a museum than a home. All expensive surfaces and no warmth, no photographs of the deceased mother, no evidence that love had ever lived within these walls. But as she worked her way through the second floor, she heard it, a sound that stopped her mid-motion and broke something open in her chest. It was crying. Not the angry screams she'd been warned about, but deep, broken sobs that spoke of a pain too big for a small body to contain. The sound came from behind the closed door of Christopher's room, and every instinct in Maya's body that had been honed through her own daughter's illness pulled her toward that door, despite the explicit instructions to stay away. She stood outside for a long moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob, knowing she could lose this job she desperately needed, knowing she was violating clear boundaries, but unable to walk away from a child in that much pain. Slowly, carefully, she opened the door. The room was destroyed, toys broken and scattered, furniture overturned, walls marked with crayon, and what looked like food thrown in anger. In the center of this chaos sat Christopher, a small boy with dark hair and eyes swollen from crying, his body shaking with sobs. He looked up when the door opened, his expression immediately shifting from grief to defensive rage, his small hands balling into fists, his teeth baring in warning. "Get out," he screamed, his voice raw. "Get out or I'll hurt you. I'll bite you and scratch you and make you leave like all the others." His threat would have been frightening if not for the tears still streaming down his face, if not for the way his whole body trembled with pain, masquerading as anger. Maya didn't leave. She didn't advance either, just slowly lowered herself to sit on the floor several feet away from him, making herself small and non-threatening, showing through her body language that she wasn't there to force anything, to demand anything, to try to fix him. She just sat in the quiet aftermath of his outburst, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm Maya. I lost my daughter 3 years ago. Her name was Sophie. She was 5. Sometimes I still want to scream and break things too." Christopher's defensive posture didn't relax, but his eyes showed confusion, not used to adults admitting weakness, not used to anyone acknowledging that his anger might be justified, rather than something to be punished and suppressed. They sat in silence for several minutes, Maya making no attempt to come closer, or touch him or offer empty comfort. She just existed in his space, someone willing to sit with his pain without trying to fix it or flee from it. Finally, Christopher's voice came out small and broken. "Did you bite people when your daughter died?" Maya considered the question seriously. "No, but I wanted to. I was so angry at everyone who was still alive, everyone who got to keep their children when mine was taken. I yelled at people. I pushed away everyone who tried to help. I understand why you bite. It makes people go away, and sometimes making people go away feels safer than letting them get close enough to hurt you more." Something shifted in Christopher's eyes. Recognition of being understood rather than judged, seen rather than labeled. He didn't smile, didn't relax completely, but his fists unclenched slightly. "Do you still miss her?" "Every single day," Maya answered honestly. "Missing her doesn't go away, but it gets different. It stops being all sharp and cutting all the time. It becomes something you carry instead of something that destroys you." Christopher processed this, his young mind trying to understand concepts too heavy for 6-year-old shoulders. "I miss my mom," he whispered. "I was in the car. I couldn't help her. I tried, but I was too little." The guilt and trauma in those words broke Maya's heart completely. Over the next hour, Christopher talked and Maya listened, not offering platitudes or promises that everything would be okay, just bearing witness to his pain with the patience of someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed or forced. When Richard finally realized the new housekeeper had been in his son's room for over an hour and rushed upstairs expecting to find her injured or fleeing, he instead found something impossible. His son sitting calmly while Maya read to him from a picture book, the boy's head resting against her shoulder, his eyes heavy with exhaustion from finally releasing grief he'd been holding for 2 years. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, his throat tight with emotions he'd suppressed since his wife's death, watching his violent, unreachable son being gentle with someone for the first time in years. Maya looked up and saw him, saw the tears in this powerful man's eyes, saw the guilt and helplessness written across his face. She didn't ask permission or apologize for breaking the rules. She simply said, "He needs therapy, not nannies. He needs someone to help him process his trauma, not people trying to control his behavior. His anger is grief. His violence is pain. He's not broken. He's hurting." The simple truth of her words hit Richard like a physical blow, exposing his failure to see his son's behavior for what it actually was. What happened next transformed everything. Richard hired the best child trauma therapist money could buy. But more importantly, he hired Maya not as a housekeeper, but as Christopher's full-time caregiver, the only person the boy would accept, the only adult he trusted enough to be vulnerable with. She moved into the mansion, her own financial struggles ending, given a salary and living arrangement that allowed her to focus entirely on helping this broken child heal. But the healing went both ways. Christopher gave Maya purpose again, filled the hole her daughter's death had left, proved that love wasn't finite, that opening your heart to someone new didn't betray the memory of who you'd lost. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Christopher still had outbursts, still bit and screamed when overwhelmed. But now he had Maya who understood that regression was part of healing, who sat with him through the storms, rather than abandoning him because of them. He had therapy that addressed his trauma, rather than just medicating his symptoms. He had a father who finally started showing up emotionally, rather than just financially, who learned from Maya that being present mattered more than being perfect. Within a year, Christopher's violence had decreased dramatically, replaced by words for his feelings, by trust that people wouldn't leave him, by understanding that his mother's death wasn't his fault. Richard watched his son return from somewhere dark and unreachable, brought back by a woman who'd walked into their lives carrying her own grief and somehow used it to build a bridge to his son's pain. He fell in love with Maya, not suddenly but gradually, seeing her strength and compassion, her patience and wisdom, the way she loved his son without trying to replace the mother he'd lost. They married 2 years after she first walked into Christopher's room, creating a family built not on pretending the past didn't happen, but on honoring it while choosing to keep living. Christopher stood beside them at the wedding, smiling genuinely for the first time since his mother's death, holding both their hands, proof that broken things could be mended if someone cared enough to sit with the pieces rather than sweeping them away.